Welcome. I'm Maureen Alexander, a member of the Saanich Inlet Protection Society, the action group that is protesting the Bamberton projects. I've got a few words prepared here that will give you a little bit of background as to what our issues are with these projects, and we hope you will feel the same. The Saanich Inlet Protection Society, referred to as SIPS, strongly believes the Bamberton Quarry expansion and the foreshore expansion activities submitted by Malahat Investment Corporation, referred to as MICO, should be designated for review under the Environmental Assessment Act. We feel an environmental assessment, referred to as an EA, is not only warranted but essential on the grounds that both projects come with substantial environmental risks that could seriously jeopardize Saanich Inlet's already fragile ecosystem and the health of the surrounding communities. Let's begin with MICO's quarry expansion application. We believe an EA on this expansion is necessary for the following reasons. First, their proposed extraction amount. The quarry expansion application will increase extraction to 479,000 tons a year, doubling the present quota. This is a 99.6% increase that will equal 19.5 million tons over the requested 30 years. At present, the requirement for a new quarry to warrant an environmental review is only 250,000 tons a year. This application is almost double that amount. In our eyes, this fact alone should warrant an environmental assessment. Also, there is no mention in the quarry management plan that it is designed for catastrophic events such as earthquakes, like the one in 1990 that caused part of the hillside to slide into the inlet, the same hillside that is now part of the proposed quarry area. In addition to those concerns, quarrying the rock face means potential leachates can be carried downhill by the intensifying rainfall and the four streams that flow directly into the inlet. Water runoff from quarry operations can create dangerous water pollution and smother aquatic life. Second, the high risk of erosion and water contamination. Quarrying an area of any size means clear cutting and blasting, which brings with it the threat of erosion, land degradation, and biodiversity loss. MICO revised its quarry application on December 21st, which means they will now be blasting deeper into a mountainside that is steeply sloped and very close to the Malahat Highway, risking the mountain's slope stability. Third, dust, noise, and light pollution. These are already an issue. Airborne dust is mostly fine sediment. It does not sink quickly and is impossible to contain. It is already dispersing for kilometers beyond the boundaries of Bamberton land and settling on plants, animals, and the seafloor. Fourth, the health and economic risk. There's concern for the significant adverse health risks and the economic risk of remediation costs that are associated with exposure to contaminants. This is the third time since 2016 that MICO has requested an expansion just below the limit for an environmental assessment. We believe this is a dangerous loophole in the current system that needs to be addressed. This loophole means an EA has never been done to determine how their heavy industrial activity is impacting both the land and water. Note, the quarry application spans 30 years and indicates an intent to expand into adjacent areas beyond what is included in this current application. Those adjacent areas would require additional expansion applications, but if those are also just below the limit for an EA, this site could go another 30 years without any environmental review. And as has already been outlined, the adverse effects of quarrying are impossible to contain within a quarry site. By its very nature, this expansion will impact the surrounding land and water. With that in mind, let's move on to MICO's foreshore expansion. This application seeks to expand the current foreshore area over 100 meters spanning 26 more acres of ocean for 30 years. We believe this is in direct conflict with Saanich Inlet's designation as a special management zone, as designated in the BC government's Vancouver Island Land Use Plan. This designation comes with management priorities that, and I quote, must incorporate environmental values. SIP's key concerns over MICO's foreshore expansion are related to the activities listed in the Foreshore Management Plan. Lack of current environmental studies. The foreshore application states there will be minimal or no significant environmental effects. However, their management plan doesn't include any current environmental studies. It presents no information that assesses the current condition of the aquatic habitat immediately in front of the quarry or in the proposed 26-acre expansion area. The only environmental study it cites to back up their claim of minimal or no environmental effects is a study done in 2005, immediately adjacent to the shoreline. This study was used to support their claim of no additional impacts to fish habitat. Please note, this study was conducted almost 20 years ago, before the foreshore area was remediated and any aggregate mining initiated. Also note, in 2017, deep dives were conducted in the proposed expansion area by Dr. Tunnicliffe, an internationally recognized marine biologist. These dives found that the activities at Bamberton had had notable impact on this area of ocean, as the marine ecosystem showed signs of notable stress. Load and unload barges of contaminated soil. The management plan states that they will load and unload barges of contaminated soil, with no explanation as to the purpose of the contaminated soil or where it will be stored. It could contain heavy metals, PCBs, hydrocarbons, and other substances known to cause damage to the environment and human health. Barging contaminated soil through Saanich Inlet and the Satellite Channel Ecological Reserve, plus spills from the offloading within the foreshore lease area, pose risks to all forms of marine life. Hydrocarbons. Barging and offloading quantities of hydrocarbons for storage at the Bamberton site create the possibility of leaks and spills on both the land and water. Moorage of vessels. The management plan states the general use of the site will not change. However, the quarry expansion application states that, and I quote, much of the increased quarry output will be shipped off-site through increased barging activity. This means more large barges will be entering the inlet and mooring, which will impose further stresses on the underlying seabed. Of particular concern is the proximity of these docks to the underwater coral bed. It's important to highlight that Saanich Inlet is not just a piece of ocean in which pollutants are eventually dispersed far and wide. The 1996 BC Environment Ministry's Saanich Inlet study states, and I quote, Saanich Inlet is a unique, deep glacial fjord separated from adjacent waters by a shallow sill that restricts water inflow. This means that any contamination to the inlet can remain for decades. Professor Tunnicliffe explained that Saanich Inlet is a reverse-flowing fjord. The circulation takes potential toxins south into the path of emerging salmon fry and would move any outwash material further south to Squally Reach, and then around the inlet's east side. This is a risk not only to the marine ecosystem, but the local economy, driven by businesses, tourism, recreation, and residents. The 1996 study also concluded Saanich Inlet is in an extremely fragile state. If non-point pollution sources continue to increase, it is expected that further environmental degradation of the inlet will occur. SIPS is not alone in requesting an EA. First Nations, community groups, and all levels of government have voiced their support for an environmental assessment. The Saanich First Nation and the Sartlip First Nations both wrote letters in full support of an environmental assessment. Adam Olsen, supported by Sonia Furstenhoff, voiced opposition to these applications in the legislature. District of Central Saanich, Islands Trust, District of Highlands, Willis Point Community Association, District of North Saanich, and hundreds of concerned residents from both sides of the inlet have written letters supporting an environmental assessment. Our concern over these projects is not just over the potential negative effect they'll have in the short term, which is already significant, but the cumulative impact that both projects together could have in the long term. Saanich Inlet was deemed environmentally fragile 27 years ago. So imagine the condition it's in now. Imagine the condition it could be in if MICO is allowed to log, blast, quarry, and transport marine vessels carrying dangerous materials for 30 years, with no environmental assessment and necessary protections put in place. Before I conclude, I think it's important to point out that in their draft report, the Environmental Assessment Office concluded the foreshore lease extension is not eligible for review, and also recommends that the minister decline to designate the Bamberton Quarry expansion as a reviewable project. They'll consider public rationale before deciding on whether designation for an environmental assessment is, in their words, in the public interest. Given the highly sensitive nature of Saanich Inlet's ecosystem and the significantly adverse environmental, economic, social, cultural, and health effects these applications pose, we say reviewing these applications is very much in the public interest. The Environment Ministry's 1996 study stated, and I quote, "Development proposals in Saanich Inlet must be assessed in terms of their impact on the environment. All environmental impacts related to a given proposal should be considered, not only those required by regulation or permit." We urge the government to follow their own advice now and designate these projects for review under the Environmental Assessment Act. An environmental assessment is an opportunity to understand and take action to halt the degradation of the Bamberton land and maintain the environmental quality of Saanich Inlet, as well as help safeguard the well-being of everyone, now and in the future. In conclusion, we strongly urge the public to post their reasons these projects should be reviewed on the Environmental Assessment Office's website, and to email the Environment Minister requesting both the quarry expansion and the foreshore expansion undergo an environmental assessment. Because what happens to this already fragile piece of land and ocean could have dire environmental impact on us all. Thank you so much. I hope you are as concerned as we are.